Hello there, welcome to this edition of the program People, Politics and Power. I am Imonia Marere. It is an aspect of human existence many would pay no heed, especially in this part of the world where the basic necessities of life evade the population, and so the very essence of it in everyday quest for survival is not appreciated. The environment plays a significant role in the existence of life as it harbors the ecosystem. That is, all living and non-living things, which include water, animals, plants, and the soil. We are all dependent on the environment for food, for air, and other needs, and governments around the world recognize the pivotal role the environment plays and are working to mitigate major disruptions of the ecosystem. Climate change impacts nations, with Africa being the most hit despite contributing less than 1% to global carbon emission. In the midst of the global phenomenon, countries are battling with peculiar environmental challenges affecting their developmental strides. In Nigeria, for instance, the key environmental issues facing the country include land degradation, deforestation, water and air pollution, occasioned by oil spill and gas flaring, with many communities losing their livelihoods to these threats. These problems persist despite existing policies and programs as indicated in the 2020 Environmental Performance Index, which ranks Nigeria 151 out of 180 countries, with Kenya, South Africa, and Egypt rating higher than Nigeria. The revised edition of the 2016 National Policy on Environment creates a nexus between development and the environment, stating that if a nation's environmental foundations are depleted, its economy will decline, its social fabric likely to deteriorate, and its political structure may even become destabilized. The policy identified fossil fuel, particularly oil and gas exploration, as a major cause of ecological damage in the Niger Delta region. Similarly, indiscriminate and illegal mining for tin and other mineral resources in many parts of the country has left many lands severely degraded. Pollution from oil exploration and gas flaring, as well as oil spills from leaking underground pipelines and storage tanks, remain a major source of concern for host oil communities. The sustainable management of the forest also raises concerns, considering the increasing state of insecurity and the utilization of the forest by criminals to perpetrate their crimes. The Nigerian government has continued to develop and review policies on sustainable management of natural resources, technology, climate change and disaster management, land degradation and desertification, estrangement, pollution, environmental hazards, disasters, and integrated coastal management. Now, it appears, however, that these efforts remain on paper, as environmental governance, education, and awareness remains a major setback. We shall attempt to examine these issues further and the efforts by the government to ensuring gross national collaboration and partnerships to mitigate the impact of environmental threats on the population. Our guest is the Minister of Environment, Dr. Mahmood Abubakar, who is charged with ensuring environmental protection and natural resources conservation. He's a microbiologist and a watersheds management specialist. Dr. Abubakar, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much once again, Honorable Minister, for joining us.
You're very welcome once again.
You are famously known to state that the world today is facing two pandemics.
Absolutely.
The COVID pandemic and the climate change pandemic.
Yes.
You mind telling us more about that? I mean, the COVID pandemic, we know we are in the middle of. Where is this? What about the climate change pandemic, which you talk about?
The climate change pandemic has been raging long before the coronavirus pandemic. The only reason why people don't see it that way is because it's unlike the coronavirus pandemic, where you will see people in hospitals, you will see people on ventilators, and many more things. The climate pandemic, which has been raging slowly on a much larger scale for years now, nations that are in the middle of Atlantic or in the middle of Pacific Ocean are losing their land mass. Why? Because of rising sea level. Why? Because of the global warming causing climate change on the larger scale. And I often say the climate change pandemic, if let to go wild, crazy, it will make this coronavirus pandemic plus the 1911 pandemic like child play. Because this pandemic currently is only dealing with the human capital. But climate change pandemic would deal with everything. The people, the infrastructure, the animals, the plant, the land, water, air, soil, everything will be affected if climate change is to go unchecked. So there is a lot more that we need to focus on our environment. In your preamble, you mentioned all the stuff that are part of the environment. The environment is totally connected. So even this pandemic, it only go as far to show the link between people, between the environment, health, biodiversity, everything is interconnected. And also if you look close enough, you will see that even the pandemic itself is the proximity between humans and animals, between humans and the forest, losing biodiversity, encroachment into wilderness. These are some of the things, because it was just figured that, yes, very, very much likely this virus came from animals to humans. So we can see the link between the two.
Now, I need you to break it down a bit for Nigerians to understand, yes, and as how this climate pandemic is affecting Nigerians in their day-to-day lives, in the way they conduct themselves and the way they treat the environment.
Excellent. Let's start with flooding. A lot of flooding issues. The 2012 flood, which was very big in magnitude. Just last year, 2020, issues of flood in so many areas. This is being exacerbated by climate change. I will tell you. One, the rising sea level that I just mentioned because of global warming. What is causing global warming? Increase in emission. Where are the emissions coming from? The daily burnings of forests or some other materials such as old tires and things like that. Industrial emission, degrading forests, which is absorbing the carbon, the emission. So with all this, you have increase in this emission, and the emission will heat up the globe, which will now increase even the melting of polar ice caps in Antarctica, which will now raise the sea. Now the oceans, when they raise, of course, tributaries of rivers coming into the ocean will now have water being pushed into the inland. In addition, people also are cutting forests, which is helping in holding the soil together, which without that, you have flow of water faster, and you have all these things. So in the cities also, you have people blocking drainages. These are all effect of climate change that will increase the volume of water coming into the city. So that is one aspect. The forest that is being cleared on a daily basis or being burnt, production of charcoal, all these are causing issues with the environment. As the globe warms up, you have plants and animals that once you exceed their temperature, they die off. So if you are talking about plants, a lot of plants are there for medicinal purposes. You lose those. So you are even losing your source of medicine. When you lose the forest, you lose source of livelihood. When you have erosion, you have the soil being washed away. People cannot use that particular area for farming. So you see all this interconnection, how climate change, how the activities of man is causing all this.
Yeah, can we use that to explain what may have happened sometime in 2020? We saw flooding in certain parts of the country,
yes,
where ordinarily no one would have thought that would happen.
Yeah.
I mean, places like Kebbi and Zamfara, where the usual thing would have been a talk of desertification.
Right.
But then in 2020, we saw flooding.
Right.
And not just in that those states alone, but in many other parts of the country.
Exactly.
These
are all part of the interference, where people clear places they are not supposed to clear, where people go into flood plains of river and build, which is supposed to take flood waters when water come. Of course, every year, whether with climate change or not, the environment is a sustainable environment. It takes care of itself. Let's go back, let's say pre-humans. There has always been flooding, erosion, even volcanic erosion, but since there was no interference, the environment is self-healing over time, is all natural phenomena. So when we come and started changing this, you block area for water, that water will have to go somewhere, and so it finds its own way. You have dams that will sometimes release water intentionally or break and unintentionally, and in areas where you don't need, where there's no possibility of flood, now you have flood. Like you are talking about Kebbi, we have dams coming from water from the dam in Cameroon. Sometimes is part of also that problem. So human interference in the environmental processes is what is causing a lot of problems around the country, and that includes flood, includes erosion, desertification, cutting of trees, and all that is all part of it.
So how much of government policies are in place to mitigate this climate pandemic and to guarantee environmental safety?
Let's start with forest management. Just recently, the Federal Executive Council approved national policy on forest management. Forest plays an important role, very, very important role. A lot of people may not know. The more trees you have, the more rainfall. The less trees you have, the less rainfall. The more trees you have, the more stable your soil is, the less soil erosion, because the roots of the trees are there holding. Also, with forestry, you can also have some kind of livelihood, probably get involved in agroforestry, where you are both enjoying the forest product as well as agricultural product. So this forest policy is to ensure the reforestation and afforestation of the area, and at the same time to stop deforestation. Mr. President, in 2019, when he went to the UN General Assembly, promised and made commitment of replanting trees, up to 25 million trees, which were ongoing. Last year, the ministry, in collaboration with many other agencies, states, local government, has planted close to that 25 million trees. But because of the pandemic, of course, we fell short a little bit, but we intend to continue the planting of 25 million trees every year. And Mr. President has supported that by not only making the commitment, but he has also provided additional funding to the environment through the Great Green Wall Agency. And the funding came from the Ecological Fund as well as Natural Resources Fund. So forestry is the main focus. Of course, we are supposed to have at least 25% of our land mass covered by forest. Right now we have about 7 or a little over 7%, and the objective is to continue this planting and replanting until we achieve that. Because like I said,
these plantings is across the country?
It's across the country. It's across the country. We have several forestry planting programs. We have the Red Plus, which is targeting specific state and specific forests to increase the number of those forests. We have the Great Green Wall, which is on the upper northern part to stop desertification. We have the National Forestry Program, which is replanting and trees all across the country. So there are 3 or 4 different programs. Why? Because trees provide the best support. They absorb carbon dioxide and other gases and produce what? Oxygen. So trees can do a lot of things. Like I said, the more trees you have, the more rainfall. If you look at, you go from the northern part, going towards the south, as you go closer, the amount of rainfall increases. So that is one area that the ministry is focusing.
So how much support is your ministry getting from states and local governments in this tree planting exercise? Because in actual fact, they are the major beneficiaries, because these trees are planted in local governments, they are planted in the states.
In the state,
yes.
Exactly, because they own the land. The federal government has very little land in some states. Well, in connection with that, we just recently, through our collaboration with the state government, were able to get the state government to gazette some lands in all their states. And this will be used as federal forest reserve. Ordinarily, any governor in his state, because they control the land, can decide to cut trees, either build homes or highway or something like that. Now, with this new idea of gazetted lands, it will be under a legal framework which will not allow anyone to just come and cut it. It has to go through a legal process. So this is an innovative way that has never been done before. And I always thank and commend the state governors for agreeing to do that. Of course, going down to the local government level, again, we work with the local government. We give them support in terms of providing seedlings, in terms of providing capacity building, and so many other things. In some cases, even financial support that we can, especially local government level. With state, we are working not just in forestry, but many other areas, for example, waste management. So there is a lot of collaboration between the states, the federal government, and the local government, and also all other MDAs. The environment really is the focal, and we have to work with everybody, because everyone is part of possible problem. So we hope everybody will be part of the solution and work together.
Okay, but let's move on to some other thing. One of the major programs your ministry rolled out in 2020 with the outbreak of COVID-19 was the decontamination of many public places. But it does appear that even with the second wave of this COVID, which is considered even more deadly than the first, that exercise, that process is waning, or in fact has been stopped.
No, it hasn't. As a matter of fact, on Saturday, we decontaminated and disinfected Federal Radio Nigeria in Kaduna. The way we do it now, 2 ways. One, many places that you may find positive cases or a positive case, and that request for decontamination and disinfection, we do that. From the beginning, why people see it more is because that was the very first outbreak, and everybody is keen to see what is happening, is paying attention. Today, because it has become kind of the new normal, while people are still protecting themselves, but they are less watchful of what is happening, especially by the government agencies in that respect. But not that we have scaled down. It's just that now it's more of where there is need and the request. From the very beginning,
now.
It's targeted. Thank you. From the very beginning, we have even decontaminated certain street. And that was because at the time, we did not have the proper protocol. We did not know what do you do to stop the spread? How do you not contaminate certain areas? Now with that additional knowledge, the possibility of contaminating some of the places that were contaminated before has been reduced because we are more knowledgeable about the virus, how it's spread, and how one can get infected. But we are still maintaining the protocol. In fact, even more, we have more environmental health specialists working around now. During the exams, WAEC exams, we distributed a lot of the specialists to different schools. During the opening of schools also, we recruited more environmental health specialists, including volunteers that were also assigned to various institutions, not just institutional learning institutions, but even working government or even private, depending on where the need arises.
Let me take you back, Honorable Minister, to the issue of carbon emissions.
Right.
Now, you are aware that in line with your nationally determined contribution, or what is called NDC, which you submitted to the UNFCCC to reduce carbon emissions by 20% in 2030. That's a submission made by Nigeria to the UNFCCC.
Right.
How much are you doing to meet that target? 2030 is just about 9 years away from now.
Okay.
How much of emissions, carbon emissions, are we emitting today as a country? And what is the step-by-step plan to meet this 20% target?
Okay, there are two commitments that we made. One is to reduce emission by 20% by 2020 last year. The second one, we also committed to reducing emission by 45% by 2030. This time around, conditionally. That one we said unconditional, the 20%, meaning we can do it on our own. Conditionally, we can reduce 45% with the help of international organizations, developed countries, agencies that can assist with finances, capacity building, equipment, other training, and so many things. And then we'll also do our own part. Now, the 20% we have achieved. Now, the question is, how much emission every year? I cannot tell you right now the amount, but what I can tell you is we have been reducing. And this 20%, by our calculations, we have met that last year through a number of programs that we have taken, which will reduce emission. Going back to forestry again, one of the ways is cutting the forest and burning it two ways. One, when you cut the forest, it stops absorbing carbon dioxide, so you have more emissions in the air. Number two, when you burn it, it produces carbon dioxide, so you have additional and not reducing. Now, we have distributed what we call smart stoves in some places. We have provided solar power in some other places. And we are also dealing with specialized kind of burning material, which we call briquette. These are a mixture of more of organic matter than regular wood, which will produce very little emission, if you will. So these are some of the ways that we have been doing in the last few years to achieve, since the Paris Agreement, by the way, 2016.
Which we have subscribed to.
Which we have subscribed to. Now coming to 45%, we are still going into what we call nature-based solution. The idea of turning into nature, making sure that we can subscribe to using what we have in the environment. For example, you can produce energy using biomass. When you produce energy using that, you are not producing any emission. So these are some of the ways that the ministry is going through, meeting its NDC obligation.
Of course, you are aware, Honorable Minister, that gas flaring is one of the major sources of carbon emissions.
Yes.
In fact, as at the last count, Nigeria is rated as the 7th largest gas flarer in the world. So what exactly is the policy on ground to reduce this gas flaring. There was a target set to end gas flaring in 2020. We missed that target. Now there is another 2030 target, just 9 years away from now.
Well, the issue of gas flaring and is what we call point source pollution. We know exactly where the pollution is coming from. So taking care of it should be easy. There are countries that have taken care partly of their gas flaring problems. We can do the same. And we're looking at a number of issues. This very same gas, one, the government can go into, or the Minister of Environment and Petroleum Resources, into partnership with private sector. This gas can be harnessed to produce electricity. This gas can be harnessed to use it as boiler for industries. A number of things can be done. And by doing so also, you will be generating a lot of employment while at the same time cleaning the environment. However, you need a lot more on the ground to do that. Talks are still ongoing in terms of gas flaring. It's a major issue. It's something that can be tackled. Again, talks are ongoing, and this involves not just Ministry of Environment, but Petroleum Resources, and of course, the government being part of all that in charge. So it's something that, like you said, we have missed one target, we are working on another target.
Has any new target date been set, apart from the global 2030 target?
Well, no. I think that's it. I guess the approach now is not to wait until 10 years from now, but working assiduously to get it stopped as soon as possible. That is the target, let me say.
So what would you then say to pundits, to critics who insist that the government is not doing very much, not doing much in terms of tangible things that you can see to reduce carbon emission, despite the obvious crisis, climate change crisis, or as you put it, climate change pandemic?
The government is doing quite a bit. Let me start by saying the government already is working on switching 9 federal universities to totally solar energy. A number of them have started, already have been converted. One of them is Kano, Nsukka is another one, and the others are on various stages of going totally solar. If you go to Bayero or Nsukka, you will see that currently right now. So the government is doing quite a bit. The green bond, which is also being undertaken by the Ministry of Environment Debt Management Office, these are programs that will provide jobs in green areas. Government is doing quite a bit in terms of reducing emission, providing funding for reforestation, afforestation. Government is doing quite a bit. We have built a number of recycling plant, waste recycling plant, to reduce emission. We have a plant here that take this nylons, plastic waste, and turn them into pellet, which you can turn into things like interlocks and stuff like that.
Bricks.
So a lot bricks. A lot is happening in that area. The government is doing quite a bit in that respect.
Well, let me keep you in that sector a little bit more.
Yes.
And this has to do with OSP, environmental degradation, even the gas flaring we're talking about, especially for people who are in those areas of the country where oil is explored and exploited, who think that government is not concerned about their well-being and their welfare. And they easily point to the Ogoni cleanup exercise. And that several years after that exercise was kick-started, or jump-started as it were, by the vice president, there doesn't seem to be much work going on in that area at cleaning up the Ogoni environment. What exactly is holding back that, with all the resources that were said to be provided for the takeoff of the cleanup? Okay.
Let's start with the oil spill that you're talking about. The Federal Ministry is in charge of oil spill. There is an agency, NOSDRA, under the ministry, which has to do with oil spill, with detection and cleanup and all that stuff. And that keep track of industries, even trucks, anywhere there is oil spill, they respond, they are there for cleanup. And they have stringent laws. We have also enforcement agency, which is NASRIA, National Environmental Standard and Regulation, all that. They keep track of any spill. And there are rules and regulations. And violating either companies or entities are charged to task to make sure that the cleanup is done. And whatever penalty, they pay for the penalty, even though in environmental cycle we prefer corrective measures rather than penalties, because you don't want to penalize people if they would like to commit the offense and pay the penalty because it's cheaper for them. We don't want that. So those two agencies are there working this. Ogoni cleanup. For the first time, long before the coming of this administration, there has been the talk on Ogoni cleanup, Ogoni cleanup. It has never really materialized all that time. When Mr. President came, he promised to do it. He is doing it. Right now, if you will go, you will find that about 15 plots or sites that have been designated as contaminated by the United Nations Environment Program have been cleaned up and certified cleaned up. There is quite a bit of progress in that respect.
So that's part of the 25, 30-year cleanup period.
You know, the first part of the program is 5 years. We are still in about the third, getting to a year and a half now, for the 3 years and a half for the cleanup.
For the first 5 years.
Yes, but remember, it started, but it could not really kick off. So it took another year before the program actually took off. So that is still ongoing. And the president has just given approval to reorganize and reject the program, which we are currently doing. A lot of things are happening in Ogoni. I can assure you, if you go there, you will see progress has been done quite a bit. We are just about to also commence the provision of water in that area because, of course, you know, they have issue of water contamination. 3 major water works are in the pipeline currently coming on. And I can assure you probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks, that work will start. So much is going on in that cleanup. And the president is very much interested in one of his major projects that he is keeping track of. And we are doing our very best. Again, working with the people in that area to make sure we have their cooperation and their buy-in to get the job done.
Is funding an issue here with this cleanup exercise?
No.
Because we know that the first phase was supposed to cost about $200 million. And we are also aware that at the time, the so-called multinational companies contributed as much as $150, $180 million for this takeoff. Is funding an issue here?
No. Funding is not an issue. The IOCs, international oil companies, are giving their contribution and is being worked. You have the governing council, you have the BOT, and then you have the project management office. These are all working to make sure the project is done. Funding is not an issue. That's the answer.
All right. Well, of course, we know that as of 2013, about 16 what they describe as less complex sites were handed over to contractors.
Right.
And it was only when the president took office in 2015 that this whole exercise of remediation started. Yes. Now there are concerns that work in the sites were either abandoned somewhere halfway or poorly executed.
There are no abandoned projects there. Remediation site, no abandoned remediation site. We make sure that these sites are remediated to the standard laid down by UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. In fact, of the 15 that I just mentioned, we took samples of 3 and we found that they are not remediated to that standard, and we handed over back to the contractor and they had to remediate it again and then took the sample, make sure it's clean. So when it said this level of TPH, we make sure is that level of the contaminant that are there, which is something that you will find even in, let's say, conventional site.
Well, there's no doubt that there's still a lot of work to be done there. Because
absolutely, yeah.
There are about 67 or so sites to be remediated.
Right.
And at least going by the UNRP report,
right,
about 67 more. So what's the possibility of expanding the number of sites to be cleaned up? Say maybe in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years?
Actually, no.
For the remaining part of the life of this administration?
No. Very soon will also be, we will start the process of contracting out the complex site. There are sites where it's not just soil contamination, but also groundwater contamination. Those are the ones we call complex sites, because they need a special kind of treatment if you are dealing with both groundwater and the soil. So those should be coming also in less than a year. What we want to do is to make sure the current sites that are being remediated, we have either completely remediated them all, or when we have just a few more, then we start the processes of remediating the complex sites. At the same time, with water project, also this year, we intend to contract out additional water project apart from the current 6 that will be started very soon.
Yeah. And in all of this, the people of that area are carried along?
Absolutely. We are also currently training 1,200 women and youth in areas of livelihood such as agriculture, aquaculture, poultry, and things like that, that will give them some kind of livelihood. Agriculture, now that you have lands that are fertile that you can plant things on.
All right, my guest is the Honorable Minister of Environment, Dr. Mohammed Mahmood Abubakar. Of course, he is a microbiologist and a watersheds management specialist. Thank you so much for staying with us. Honorable Minister, let's look at waste management. Is another aspect of your work in the Ministry of Environment.
Yes.
How much of compliance can we say is being observed by companies, industrial companies, to the extended producer responsibility policy, which is aimed at recycling waste that is generated by producers?
The area of waste management, again, last year, 2020, we were able to get 2 policies approved by the Federal Executive Council. One is the overall solid waste management policy in the country. Second, specifically, policy on plastic waste management. Both of them approved by the Federal Executive Council. And these are policies which will be operated by the federal government, but of course in conjunction with the state and the local government. They were both consulted during the establishment of this policy, and it will be collaboratively operated by the 3, in fact, including communities and businesses. Now, what is the level of compliance by industries? We have the agency called NASRIA, National Environmental Standard Regulation and Enforcement Agency. They are the one responsible for making sure that companies comply. One, in the management of solid waste, the collection, the disposal, and all that. Also the release of liquid waste, effluent from industries. These are all being coordinated by that particular agency, and we have rules and regulation. With liquid waste, of course, you measure how much of which contaminant can be released into the stream after treatment. With the solid waste, of course, you have the conventional waste, you have the hazardous waste, also different ways of disposal. All this is being coordinated by that agency. We have, of course, penalties for companies that are not following the rules and regulations. We make sure that the environment is kept safe. It's part of our mandate. So we have agency that does that. And the policy also has provided the framework and the legal framework to make sure that people know what to do, and if they fail to do so, what we can do. Again, working with the state, the Federal Ministry of Environment has built a number of waste treatment plants, which we have handed over to the state, and specifically asked that the state collaborate with private entities. That is the only way that this will be sustainable, because once you have someone putting his money in there, will want to make at least profit. So in terms of solid waste, this is what the ministry is doing, and we are getting cooperation of the state, cooperation with private entities. Another thing about waste we are looking at on a holistic way is how can we produce also energy and other product, fertilizer from waste through composting. We are talking with some companies that can compost conventional waste, domestic waste, for example. We are also looking at companies that can produce electricity from incineration, a special kind of incineration that itself does not produce a lot of emission. There is what we call pyrolysis. It's intense heat where you burn almost everything, you produce very little. And there's also this company that can produce a diesel kind of fuel from incinerating waste and at the same time energy. So on the larger scale, we are looking at various ways that we can use waste. Instead of it becoming waste or menace, it's now a resource that can be utilized.
So how much of technology is being brought to bear on this entire process?
There are some. Well, with the production of energy or pyrolysis, yes, there is a bit of technology. Some of these things we have to import. The simpler ones to medium we are doing here, like this plant that we are building. However, we are talking with companies from outside Nigeria. We just looked at some product. These are mobile waste incinerators that can produce energy, electricity, with very little emission. And when we said emission, in the end we are looking at zero emission. But it may be difficult to have zero, but you can have very little emission, which will be acceptable, considering that humanity has to survive. So, but all that we are trying to do is something that is environmentally friendly, something that can coexist with nature and not damage it, something that will make the environment become sustainable, so that we don't leave a degraded environment to the next for the next generation. This is the idea of really environmental sustainability.
Nigeria, of course, is a country that has challenges with generating electricity, with energy, power, and all of that. And there are countries in the world today, like India, that is generating power, generating energy from waste.
Yeah.
We have so much of such waste.
Yes.
What are the plans to, say, possibly look in that direction, and then by implication solve some of our energy problems?
Well, that's exactly what we are planning on doing, getting in contact with companies and countries even that have done it, developing countries like us, like India, for example. We have been to India on several other environmental issues, including energy production. And Nigeria is working exactly towards that. Even coming back to the gas flaring, it's the same thing. We can harness this gas that is being flared to produce electricity. So we are looking at that. Some of these things are highly complex. Some are things that we can do, and we are currently doing. Like I mentioned, the energizing education, which is a collaboration between Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Education, and the Debt Management Office, Finance, to do that. And we are producing now. There are also wind energy. I don't know if you have been to the area of Katsina. Some wind energy is also being looked at, and we have several areas that we can target that may have high wind flow that can also be. So one of the things about really meeting the commitment, the NZC, is looking at various ways of producing energy that can substitute for the conventional fossil fuel energy.
Now, you talked about some of these agencies of government that are particularly focusing some of these regulations, NESRA, NOSDRA. And all of them.
There's also Biosafety Agency is also a regulatory agency which has to do with...
and all of them are set up by law.
Right.
And they have their jobs cut out for them.
Absolutely.
But it appears that some of them are actually not applying the law as far as their regulation is concerned. For instance, the agency, NOSDRA, that is concerned with gas flaring, NESDRA that is concerned with environmental protection and all of that, they do not seem to be enforcing the law. There's a lack of political will to enforce the law. How do we reverse that and make sure that these companies and even individuals are held accountable for what they do?
Well, I will not say there is no political will or they are not enforcing. They are. However, you see, people always want to cut corners. It's like a cat and mouse game. They are chasing these polluters. They catch them, they penalize them. Some may even leave entirely that particular and move elsewhere to go and to continue polluting. People like to just cut corners, hide, and commit crime against the environment. I can assure you that what the agencies are doing, they are doing a tremendous amount of work considering the Nigerian environment, the people. Nigeria is a very large country, both landmass and population. We're over 200 million. You have businesses, some of them that are not even registered. You have businesses that are, even if you look at illegal things like illegal mining and so many other things, refining of petrol and all that stuff in the forest. So you have to track them down, to penalize and to shut them down.
And some of these multinational companies do what they do in Nigeria, what they cannot do elsewhere, even in some other smaller African countries. I
don't think they do what they do. We have rules and regulations. We're applying the rules and regulations. When we see there are always lawsuits against these companies where they have done commit any crime or something, and then where the Environment Ministry comes in, we are always conscious of especially oil pollution in that area, because that is currently what we are doing, remediating that. And for us to not pay attention and allow the pollution to continue, then what are we doing cleaning up? So I can assure you that the ministry and the agencies are doing whatever it takes. The government is doing, Minister of Petroleum Resources, they have their own parts to play when it comes to the oil companies. This is a multi-faceted collaboration, especially in terms of environmental protection.
Mm-hmm. So, on a final note, Minister, tell us what are your projections and plans for the next 2 years, for the next 3 years?
Right now, let me start by saying Nigeria is also preparing for COP26, which is to happen hopefully by the end of this year in Glasgow. And one of the things is turning to what I mentioned earlier, nature-based solution. Realizing that a lot of problems are emanating from the environment, why don't we turn around and use the very same environment for our own livelihood, so that when we use the environment in terms of sustainable development, we live good, clean, quality environment for our for the next generation. One of them is the provision of solar or wind energy. Is the management of waste to produce energy rather than allow it to become source of diseases and suffering for the people. Again, the program of green bond. This is the first time that people are actually investing in something that pertains to environment. Let's say forestry, let's say agroforestry, let's say erosion control, flood control. So these are some of the ways that we are turning back to nature. And a lot of this involves every other agency which has also one component or the other. The Ministry of Environment, Agriculture, Water Resources were working in good partnership, because all of these are tightly together. So we are moving into that. In the next 2-3 years, we hope to see an environment that is more dependent in its own resources rather than creating artificiality or creating businesses that put undue pressure on resources and people. This is what we refer to as the nature-based solution. Even our national parks, our biospheres, where you can use to even simple business as growing snails, as growing other things that are based in the environment.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Dr. Mohammed Mahmood Abubakar, the Honorable Minister for the Environment, a microbiologist by training, and a watersheds management specialist. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
All right. That's our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.